Tech Talks, House Rules. Join us on AVE Live, Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Join us on Zoom. Watch on Facebook or YouTube from the AV Educate page, or register as an attendee for the webinar. Live Q&A. Our guest will lead us through a guided demo and conversation about tonight's topic. We will take your questions and comments throughout the show. Don't wait until the end. Get your questions and comments in early to shape the conversation. We don't know it all. We're human and don't claim to know everything. We may demonstrate or discuss one way to do something, but that doesn't mean it's the only way to do it. If you found another way that is easier or yields better results, please share with the community so we can all learn together. Follow AV Educate. We're on Facebook, Instagram, and have a library of content on YouTube. Join us on Zoom for AV Tech Talks and to become a member of our community on Discord, where the conversations, the learning, and the sharing continues. We are where you are. Place your phone over the QR code to come learn more about AV Educate.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, to AV Tech Talks. Thanks for joining us. It is Sunday, April 10th, and tonight we're going to be talking about troubleshooting and diagnostic tips. So, things tend to go wrong at some inopportune time. It happens to everybody. It's just the way it is. And tonight we're going to talk about what we can do when those things happen to us, and how we can recover from that, and what steps we take to troubleshoot and diagnose a problem. Because sometimes it's not very obvious what the problem is, and we have to do a little bit of digging to find the root cause. And sometimes it's not even on show site. Sometimes we're in the shop and we're just like, hey, something didn't work last show, or we're building something new and we're trying to figure it out, and we run into issues. So we've got a panel here tonight, great panel. Omar's joining us. Bodie's here tonight, along with, Leland Best. Iris is back. We haven't seen Iris in a while, so thank you for joining us tonight. Pete, Pete the DJ. I forget what your PJ DJ, is that what it is, or DJ PJ?
DJ PJ, but
there we go.
I'm more than just radio.
Yes. And of course, Brian Maddox, the man, the myth, the legend. So thank you for joining us, everybody. I'd love to get started by asking the panel. And actually, I guess before I do that, I'll mention, hey, if you're watching and you want to talk about troubleshooting, if you have an issue that you've been dealing with that's driving you nuts, let's talk about it. Put it in the chat. Put it in the Q&A. If you're here on Zoom, or if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, put it in the chat. Let us know what kind of issues you've been running into, and maybe someone in our panel can help lead you in the right direction, or at least tell you where to start looking so you can diagnose it yourself. Or if you've got a great troubleshooting tip or a great diagnostic tip, like if you have a certain tool that you use to always diagnose this kind of issue or whatnot, just share that with us so the community can all benefit. So while you guys are working on putting in that in the chat, I'll ask our panelists, troubleshooting. Does anybody have a rule of thumb, or what are some of the things that you do when you approach troubleshooting an issue, or does anybody have an issue that they recently solved? Hey, Omar, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'll kind of go over a quick one that I use. So I own 2 decimeters, and in my kit, there's a feature in the decimeter, and I know a lot of people use this, so this is like a kind of like a fun one. For troubleshooting, there's a feature that allows you to set the screen when it has no signal to a color. And a lot of times I set that to cyan. So what it does is it allows me on the signal flow part, I can very quickly troubleshoot where my fault is. So if my decimeter is plugged into, let's say, a DSM for this scenario, and the DSM is seeing a cyan color, I know the DSM and whatever cable I'm going out to that monitor, which at this point, let's say HDMI, is getting a signal from the decimeter itself. So that's a visual confirmation for very quickly to see what's happening. Now, when I plug that HDMI line in, if it goes to black and there's no screen, that still tells me that my signal is getting brought to the decimeter and it's being sent to the screen. I'm not sending anything to that screen, so it's not just a black screen. Vice versa, I've seen it where guys run cables out and run a little box, and they get a black screen, and they don't know whether they're getting a signal or not. And then it's figuring out, well, is it the box? Is it the cable? Which cable is it? Is it on the other end? So for me, when I have a decimeter online for something, I always turn on, instead of just a black, no signal to black, I put no signal to cyan. If I got multiples, I'll pick multiple colors: green, red, cyan, purple. And I'll see those colors pop up on the DSMs or the monitors that I'm using. And it's just a very quick visual for me to troubleshoot on the fly where in that chain I'm having a problem. And that's kind of something I do all the time in video world. Anytime I'm using a decimeter or I see one, I'm always like, hey, you have a problem, plug that in real quick. Let's see where it's at. And it's just a very quick visual for me to find and troubleshoot a problem. That's kind of a quick one I can give real quick.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's a great tip. I do the same thing. So that's that's a really good tip, and it works because you instantly can see if you have some sort of issue, and if you get signal back. If like, for example, you are having an issue and you wiggle the cable and then all of a sudden it pops up cyan, you know that maybe that cable has an issue. Brian, did I see you have something to add?
You did see a hand, and I'm only tagging off of this because Omar reminded me of a little trick that I use all the time, which is that I don't ever use. I'm an audio person for anybody that doesn't know who I am, so all I do is audio really, but I never use 1K tone to tone out anything, because everybody uses 1K tone. And it becomes very easy if you're in a scenario where maybe tone could be coming from more than one place to get your tones mixed up. Whose tone is going where? So just as a habit, I like 750. It's a nice, pretty sound. I like that one. But the bottom line is, like, just as, Omar is basically like, I'm not gonna send black, because that doesn't tell me anything. There's nothing unique about that. It's like, I'm going to send cyan because I know that that's not something that is commonly coming out as a tone, as a test signal. It's kind of like if you want to use color bars, it's good to have ID'd color bars, because everyone's got color bars. And how do you know for sure whose color bars are you looking at? So that's the audio version of that. Is, if you're going to do a tone for something from a console, most consoles now allow you to select the frequency or change the frequency or make it something different, and making it something other than 1K is a really great way, especially if you're checking bi-directional signals and they're sending you tone and you're sending them tone. If they're different tones, the other trick, and the Yamaha TL-QL consoles allow you to do this, a lot of other consoles will as well, is they allow you to put 2 different tones on all 2 different channels. So you can put like a 400 on left and a 750 on right. So again, you're then also able to identify left and right, as well as that it's a different tone than just whatever's coming from the truck or from some other place. So that's my tagging onto Omar's idea and just applying it to audio.
That's great, Brian. Yeah. Actually, that double tone thing, that 2 different tones on 2 different channels, me and our buddy Andy Lipnick, when we were in Ohio last year working on the Pro Football Hall of Fame job, one of our responsibilities was to check all the press boxes and make sure that they were getting their feeds. So we set up 2 different tones so we could go to each one and check 2 at a time, instead of having to do 1 at a time and then go back and do another one. So yeah, no, absolutely, totally awesome tips here. These are exactly what we're looking for. These kinds of tips. So Bodie, you got something to add?
It's kind of funny. It's kind of coming down the line here. Omar started with the different colors as far as, putting different colors. I use blue instead of cyan, but I use blue because typically nothing gets sent blue. But like Brian said, once I'm set up and I know everything's seeing the blue, then what I go through is I have a custom color bar that has my company name on it with a custom color bar that I put into vMix or that I put in wherever I'm sending my signal from. So that way, if I got projectors or an LED wall or something I'm trying to get signal to, okay, you're seeing my color bars. You're not seeing that guy's color bars or that guy's color bars. You're seeing my color bars. You're seeing the color bars you should be seeing. All right, we're good. Now we can switch it out.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yep, absolutely. Makes it easy to identify. And see, so what I've heard from these three examples though is people who have a system for what they're doing. So and something they're doing consistently. So when you ingrain that into your workflow, it becomes very easy for you to troubleshoot and know that the things that are supposed to be working are working. So I'm very big on building systems, so like having and by systems I mean I like my own mental checklist or my own way of doing things every time, and having things in a fashion that I do repeatably, so that it's one less thing to think about. It's kind of like how Steve Jobs always wore the black turtleneck shirt. He never had to think about it. He just had 100 of them, and that was his thing every day, and that was one thing less he had to think about every morning. So just come up with a system that works, whatever is your thing. It's great. It does help sometimes if it's kind of a standardized thing, because there are already systems that exist, and we don't all have to reinvent the wheel, but something that you understand and can identify with. Pete, what do you got?
So in my travels and various work, last year I worked for an AV company. Whenever we were sending out a projector or a monitor, we had I forget the name brand it was, but it was a simple little device with an HDMI output and a tone and color bars. And that was a quick way to test something in the shop. What everyone else said about using color bars in your ID, I've used that before. I also carry a multimeter, because that sometimes gets down to the bare bones of, is there some sort of continuity in that cable you need to test? And I have a couple other electrical test tools right now that I use when I'm out there.
Yeah, that's great. Multimeter is a absolutely useful tool. Iris, what do you want to add?
I know it sounds kind of simplistic, but since I'm pretty much teaching beginners right now, I tell them start at the beginning. Always follow your chain. Start at the beginning, go one thing at a time. Don't jump to the middle and go, oh, wait, maybe it's this, but then it's not, and where you go from there. Always have a direction to follow. Always, if you have to change something, change the easiest thing first before you take everything apart.
Absolutely. That's very great advice. I'm a big fan, and I say this all the time. Whenever I'm helping somebody troubleshoot something, or if someone tells me they're having some sort of issue, I use the phrase always, think horses, not zebras. So I find that, and what that, and for people who aren't familiar with that phrase, it's if you hear hoof prints, or if you hear hoofs in the distance or whatever, think horses, not zebras means don't think of like the most complicated thing it could be. It's going to be horses, unless you're in the deserts of Africa, it's going to be horses. So think horses, not zebras. Don't think of the most complex or obscure sort of thing it could be, unless you've exhausted all those simple things first. So I'm very much that. Start at the beginning. I know Brian's done a lot of house of worship work. I've done a lot of not-for-profit and like community center sort of work. And when I would get phone calls, the first thing I would ask, I would start with is the cable plugged into the channel, and is the mixer turned on? And sometimes that's as far as it needed to go. But then I would work down the channel strip, even though 9 times out of 10, with one community center in particular, their mixing board had a button that said breakpoint mute. If anybody is familiar with some of the older Mackies, that just kills everything. And 9 times out of 10, it was that button. But I didn't want to jump to that button because who knew if everything else was pegged in the channel beforehand, and I didn't want them to all of a sudden unmute and be screaming, and now we have to figure out why the speakers don't work anymore. So yeah, start at the beginning and not at the end, not in the middle. Start from the top, and you'll probably find along the way where your issue is. So that's great advice, Iris. Thank you.
Yeah,
Leland.
we had the mixer turned off thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it happens.
Let's play tag then, because off of Iris's, I'd like to state from the beginning, it kind of starts with one thing that really helps troubleshooting a lot, and that's a diagram. So if you know what you have, when you start, when you lay out your equipment and you're putting it all together, to just simply take notes while you're doing so and know what cable went from A to B and what unit showed up on that line of connection, then troubleshooting makes time much less critical, because you can simply look at what you've already laid out and know where everything's headed without having to trace route everything that you've established. So it does make it a good point. And just as far as tools and such, at that point in the beginning, obviously cable testers, I've had these old Linkmaster, for since Cat 3, really, these things have worked. So it just continues to transpire. And the Mackie tester, the multi-cable tester, as we've mentioned, I'd demonstrate it, but I don't have a 9-volt battery in stock like we were talking earlier with batteries. So that one's out of the question. But I think having the diagram makes a lot of sense on any case, because most of the people that come to me and say, hey, this doesn't work, I'll say, do you know what you have? Can you tell me where things start and where they go? And they usually can't. So the first thing I do is I sit down with them and I diagram it on some type of flow chart, so even they know exactly where their equipment stands.
Very cool. And Bodhi's showing us something. Let me spotlight that for everybody real quick. So what are we looking at?
So what this is, I actually started using Lucid charts. So Lucid chart, hold on, let me bring it back up, is a free program. It costs money, but you can use it free. It gives you so many things. So what this is actually signal flow to and from a Barco E2 machine of everything that's coming into the E2, everything that's going out of the E2, where it's going to, what it's going to, how it needs to be. It's even broken down to the science. And I did all this for one of the shows. It's broken down to a science where it's like, here's your decimator. You're going to need a 10-foot SDI here. You're going to need a 50-foot SDI here. You're going to need a 6-foot HDMI here. It's literally broken down to the actual, like, okay, everything's coming here. I got the watch out machine that way. I need XYZ to get it into my Barco machine. I have graphics, I need XYZ to get into the Barco machine. Oh, this is in front of house. I need a 100-foot SDI to get it back to the E2 machine. Oh, I have this going on over here. This needs 2 25-foot SDIs out so it can capture me to send out for stream. I use Lucid Charts for everything now. Lucid Charts is free. It's limited on some of the things that you can do for free, but you can't pay for it. But literally, I can lay out an entire show before it even goes there. It's just, okay, what are we doing video-wise? Okay. What are we doing audio-wise? Okay. I can do all the video stuff. I'll get with you on the audio stuff. We'll lay it out. So when I get there, I can send this to everybody on the show. Everybody knows exactly how it's got to get set up.
Draw.io is the same thing as Lucid.
Yep.
And if you ever want to check that out, you can get to that real simply too. And it has a desktop app you can use on your PC. I don't know if it has a Mac app or not.
Yeah.
So that's another great thing to, the greatest tool in your troubleshooting work belt is good preparation. So having a chart, having a plan is going to give you the best chance for being able to figure it out. If everything kind of went in willy-nilly and there's no sort of diagram, or it's all in your head of what's plugged into where and where it runs, well, then that might make it a little more difficult. So
and that has absolutely become one of the biggest pet peeves for me. And label your damn cables. Please label your cables, because I'm going to tell you flat out right now, if I'm going to show with you and you don't label a cable, I'm smacking you. Because when something goes wrong, you need to know where to trace that to. You're just picking up a bundle of cables and going, okay, which one's not working? Oh, I don't know. Well, where's this one going to? Is this going to the one that we're having an issue with? No. How do you know?
It's the black cable. It's the black cable.
Exactly. It's the black. Ed said something real important though, and that is when you keep it in your head, you're the only person that knows that workflow. No one else would be able to describe it without a piece of paper that says this is what works and what doesn't. So keeping it in your head isn't helping anybody but yourself. And if
100%. And if I change something, I'm letting everybody know, hey, listen, we're no longer using X here. We're using B here because this wasn't working the way we wanted it to work. So we switched it out. Everything's labeled on both sides where it's going. If you have any questions, come find me and I'll explain it to you. I'll explain to you exactly what's going on further if you have any questions.
So that's a good point, is if you change something, you have to update your labels. I'm very big on labeling, and I've actually been told by PMs on jobs, you don't have to label everything. It takes too much time. And I say, if I get hit by a bus, who knows what's going where? I always say, what if I get hit by a bus after rehearsal? Who's going to fix it? Who's going to know where it goes? I saw Pete's hand, and then I saw Iris. So we'll go to Pete and then Iris.
So here's something I've done for a number of years for anything that takes batteries. And I'm going to hold this up to my camera. It's a remote control. I don't know if you can see it. But if you might be able to see a couple of highlighted spots in there. Okay. Inside a lot of devices that are plastic, where the battery case is, you have positive and negative. Okay. One thing I carry with me is a silver and a black Sharpie. And what I do is I color the positive ends for that battery so I know quickly if I need to change the batteries, which way they can go in. Because the way a lot of these manufacturers create stuff, it's just stamped into the plastic. And the older you get, the less eyesight you have. In my line of work, I'm in a lot of live events like theater, and so we have very little light to work with sometimes on stage or backstage when we have to solve a tech problem. So silver Sharpie or black Sharpie for that.
Yeah, that can help a lot, especially on a dark stage. So that's a good tip. Iris?
I'm going to go with the adding on to everything else that if someone comes and says, this doesn't work, don't say, this doesn't work. Tell me what's wrong with it. Don't just say, broken, doesn't work, no good. Details. Because if I have to check your stuff, or if I have to try and fix it, I can spend 10 minutes fixing it or 3 hours diagnosing it, trying to figure out what the heck you think is going wrong, because you're not telling me what's wrong.
Hey, the DSM's not working. Well, what's not working about it? Is it not turning on? Does it not have power? Is it what's going on with it? Oh, well, we can't see the picture. Oh, okay, hold on. Okay, we're not plugged in over here.
We've gotten stuff with a tape on it that just says no good.
What are you
Okay,
doing?
no good. What does no good mean?
Hey, sorry. So it looks like we might have had a little bit of trouble on our stream. So if you're having trouble seeing us and or getting choppy video or anything, join us on the Zoom. I put the link in the chat so you can join and register. You can join in the Zoom webinar. That's holding on solid. I'm not sure what's been going on. We've been having a lot of issues with Facebook lately, especially. But if you're on Facebook or YouTube and you're having any sort of poor performance, just join us on the Zoom. And Bodie, if you don't mind, I think you're on the YouTube. If you can throw that link in there as well, that'd be great.
Already did it, my friend.
Thank you, sir. You're great. Great. So where did we leave off? I know Iris was just giving us good stuff. Brian Maddox.
Yeah, I'll jump into where Leland and Iris were. So I sent, and I think he's going to post it. All right, so the history is that I finally got fed up and wrote a rant on a forum after someone asked the same stupid question. I'm sorry, very smart, intelligent, great question for the 47,000th time. And I proceeded to, at 1 o'clock in the morning, rant on a forum about like, do these things, please, people, do these things because you're driving me crazy. The end of that rant was, and learn how to troubleshoot. And then there was like 7 steps of troubleshooting in the rant. And long story short, ProSound Web grabbed it pretty much exactly as was and published it. So there must have been some grains of truth in there. I did give a link to that to Ed, but the first step I put in troubleshooting is test your tester. But I think the one that should have gone before that, the second one I have is isolate the problem. But I think the very first one is identify the problem, which is what Iris was basically talking about. Not it doesn't work. That's not a problem. That's not a symptom. Like give me a symptom. It's buzzing, it's flashing, it's black, it's showing the wrong thing, and also identify with specifics. We can't see the slides. Okay, so who's we? Where are you looking for slides? Are there supposed to be slides there? We can't see them on the DSMs. Which DSMs? Maybe there's 5 DSM feeds. Maybe this, and so I will say we're going to get as techs lots of people saying this is broken without any information. What our job is to tease out of that what the actual problem is, to ask those questions of what is it that you expect it to do that it's not doing, that because if we don't know what the problem is, we can't even begin to fix it. So first thing, and we all see this a lot on Facebook forums and all kinds of other things. Just my microphone's broken, I have speakers, what's wrong? And it's like I'm gonna need a little more information than it's broken and I have speakers. So yeah, number one thing is
broke. Please help with my mic.
Well, and see that's actually, but then there was information in that because that is an intermittent microphone. And so it's not just broken, it is intermittent. That tells me something. It's not just a non-working connection. It's not a patching problem. It's not a patching problem if it's intermittent. So I can take patching right out of the loop. It's something else that's causing the problem. So yeah, what's the problem? Number one.
No, absolutely. Yes, that's a great point. So, and then I guess some of that is how do we identify? So what steps do we take and what questions do we ask to identify that? And if we're the one who's responsible for identifying the problem, what's some of our thought process on how we figure out what is the actual issue? Because sometimes symptoms could be indicative of multiple different broken aspects earlier in the chain. So I think, Leland, you got your hand? What do you got to say?
I'll start with obvious stuff like cracking and popping is going to probably be an electrical connection or some type of crossover, whether you've got a power connection onto an audio cable or a broken wire or a disconnection or a bad jack where you're connecting in, a bad adapter. And then there's phasing where your audio's coming in and out. It might be your mic setup. It could be how you've got your audio levels established. It could be other hardware within the system. It could be RF interference from your cell phone sitting too close to your other sound devices. So there's telltale signs, and those will be the first two I'll give. I'm sure several of the other panelists have others, so add to
it. Brian, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, since Leland opened up the audio door, I'll step boldly through it. So yeah, the problems really come down to if you can even start narrowing things down. So it's it's not making any sound. So that's one. It's supposed to make sound and it's not making sound. That's one subset of things. It's making a sound and it's really wrong. Everyone can tell it's wrong. It's crackling. It's distorted. And then there's the last one that Leland mentioned, which was it's making sound, but it just sounds odd. It's just not quite right. And just organizing in those 3 blocks enables you to eliminate huge amounts of it could be's. And so sometimes someone will report a problem and they will just say it's not working, and asking questions to separate into those 3 blocks can be hugely. It's like when you say it's not working, do you not hear sound? No, we hear sound. Okay, does it sound like someone's voice, like it's supposed to? No, it sounds like a robot. Okay, so it's making sound, but it's weird. So we know it's in this section. Or, oh, it's crackling, like they'll start to say, oh, it's this. So it's teasing out, it's not working doesn't tell us enough information. So then, teasing out, and then, and this is probably before those questions, I'm always trying to tease out when I hear a report of something's not working correctly, is what is the source of their information? Is it firsthand, or is it secondhand, or is it third hand? And if it's firsthand, what is it that they are witnessing? And so I know that this sounds really like philosophical, like it's freaking troubleshooting, but ultimately, the microphone's not working. Well, where are you listening? Oh, I'm listening on my laptop. I do a lot of interactive Zoom calls. I'm listening on my laptop. Well, everyone else on the call hears it but you. So the fact that it's listening on your laptop versus I'm listening on the stream, oh, that's a very different thing. Like, okay, so maybe what is their point of reference? Their point of reference could be wrong, in which case, like, nothing's broken but their laptop. So teasing out that information, it's worth, because people will just come and go, it's not working, fix it. And you have to sort of, I'm going to take 90 seconds. I'm going to ask you a few questions to try to narrow this down some and get it into a space where I can then work the problem in an intelligent way that actually makes sense, or identify that it's not actually a problem, like, which often happens. It's, I can't hear the microphone over there. Well, I don't have any speakers over there because I didn't want anyone over there to hear the microphone. So what you're reporting is correct. You can't hear the microphone over there. Things are working as they're supposed to. Sometimes it's as simple as that.
Somebody better grab the mic from Brian before he goes too far in his audio trail. But I totally understand where you're coming from, because it is one of those things that, and some people get into an anxiety mode right away when something troubling happens. The first thing we have to do is clear our head of that all hell's going to break loose and this is all going to collapse. Everything's going to go wrong and break because this one little thing, this snag that we have, is causing us an issue. And like Brian said, identify that issue before you go freaking out that the issue is really that complex. Because I think one of the biggest problems I see in the field is just the fact that I just had a simple record today with an individual that was in a not ideal location with literally laptops flying around off shelf and landing on the floor and all this kind of stuff, because the person was so anxious to get done what they wanted to get done and make it right. But it wasn't about, it was making it worse because she was just that aggravated and kind of frustrated when really it had just started and there was nothing to really complain about at all. I just wanted to calm her down a little bit. So we do have to think about ourselves now and then when it comes to troubleshooting, knowing that the problem could be this big and we're making it out to be like this. So sometimes we got to take a break.
No, great points. One of the things, going before we get too far from audio with Brian, one of the things I hear often is, as a symptom, is it's noisy. We hear it, but it's noisy. It's making a weird noise. And usually my first question to that is it a hum or is it a buzz? And I will usually go, is it a hum, or is it a buzz, zzz? Because that tells me a lot. I can, from how the person answers, unless they say, I don't know, which then that leads to Brian's other point of this person got that information from someone else. And now I'm getting it as at least secondhand information typically. So, those kinds of things. It's like when you go to your mechanic and you say, my brakes are making noise. They say, is it screeching or is it grinding sound? Because that tells them something. So little benign pieces of what might seem like benign pieces of information to the unknowing can tell a lot to the person who has been around the block a handful of times. Just on Facebook, Noah had chimed in, going back to labeling. He says on the tour that he's on, not only is everything labeled, but all of his boxes are color coded as well as the stage plot to match his drop boxes. So everything's labeled, it's noted on a diagram, and it has a color code. So he has multiple ways of identifying something. Instead of saying, hey, that black box on the stage, look for the input that says hi-hat. Well, there's 4 black boxes on the stage. Oh, the one with the red tape on it. That makes it a little easier to track things down. So thanks, Noah, for that little bit. And then Rick here in Zoom put in the chat, which again, if you guys have questions, use that Q&A function if you're on Zoom. That just helps us find questions, is how do you separate what kind of feedback they have? Is it feedback? Is it system hum? Is it only when the pastor is using his wireless mic and has a cell phone on? So those sorts of things, again, help you narrow down some of the things that it could be, because, a symptom could have multiple different causes, and tracking down which one it is. And symptoms can seem like they might be the same thing when there's subtle differences that make them not. Leland.
Yeah, I was just going to touch on that fact when it comes to echo, or at least in some of these cases, an acoustic echo versus maybe a dual mic. So a lot of times you'll be sitting there, and if there's a delay to that, you're usually dealing with an acoustic echo where there's a loop back feed of the audio coming back into someone's speakers into the feed. If you're hearing that at the same time with a slight offset, then you're likely dealing with a couple of mics that are bringing the same feed in from different locations at different angles or different perspectives. So you're getting a little bit of an offset in the tone. So that's one thing to watch for when it comes to an echo feed.
Yeah, it could be a number of things, or somebody could have just forgot to turn their reverb off when they entered a meeting. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could happen. Brian. And
yeah,
then,
for instance, yeah. So he was telling on me. Well, I was getting ready to tell on myself, but it actually was really good. It was a really good example of what we're talking about. When I first jumped on this Zoom call, and I turned my microphone on, everybody was like, "You sound like you're like in a well, like it's all reverby," and that alone told me a huge amount of information, because they didn't say you sound echoey, because that could have been a Zoom thing, or I have 2 Zoom calls on, or 2 separate sounds are happening with some space in between them. They said it sounded reverby, and since I'm in a relatively small room, there's not that many things that could be making reverb other than the mixer I'm talking through has a reverb generator on it. So it was very easy for me to look at my mixer and go, oh, the reverb is turned up, and turn it down. So that information, all those little pieces, the difference between reverby sound versus an echo sound versus it sounds like there's a delay, or it sounds like, and all this is applicable to video or lighting or anything else. It's, basically trying to find ways to isolate what the actual problem is and narrow down the possibilities before you ever start putting a tester on anything, or even start down the line of checking something. It's how much can we isolate the problem down to, it's this screen is showing the wrong thing, or it's this source is not showing up where it should, but it is showing up here, but it's not showing up there, or just trying to isolate down the problems so that we then have a much smaller area to tackle.
That's a great point, and something that leads me to steer the conversation a little bit is our, I don't want to say the most reliable, our first line of defense as far as diagnostic tools are our 5 senses. So if you can see that the wrong thing is on a screen, well, that tells you something. You don't have to get a tester out to know that to tell you that something's wrong. You can see that it's wrong. If you hear, as we've already talked about, different things, either it's something sounds wrong, or it's the right thing, but it's noisy, or it's nothingness, we're using, our hearing to do that. So there's all sorts of, colors. We can see on camera, oh, that doesn't look right. Oh, all the whites look very blue or very yellow. So now we know we can see that somewhere, maybe it's the camera's not white balanced. Maybe it's the monitor we're looking at. There could be, or some processing in the switcher, whatever it is. But that gives us an indication of some sort of thing, or it looks right here, it doesn't look right there. Well, that probably tells us that, one of those pieces of gear is not right, So using our senses are the first thing that we should be using before we jump into any kinds of tools. I mean, I'm sure Brian, especially because I know you do a lot more live stuff. What do you think of as soon as you smell kind of an oxidized smell when you're on show site?
That something electrical is burning, and that's not a good thing. No, I was literally going to say the sense of smell. Like if something stops working, and then I smell the smell of burnt electronics, something has broken because of a power thing, and that either the piece of gear has failed or perhaps the power itself has failed. We have a really big problem. But regardless, something isn't just plugged in wrong. Now it's broken. And now I need to find what's actually burnt and broken and figure out why it got burnt and broken and figure out how we're going to work around the fact that it's burnt and broken. But yes, I have been on more than my share of that's burning, and that's not what we wanted. That's not what, there's no pyro on this gig, so we weren't expecting the gear to be pyro for us. So let's figure out what's burning.
And but once you've smelled that oxidized electronic burning smell, because it's different than a campfire burning smell, you know immediately once you've been exposed to that and you smell it again, you know what that is. You know that that's not right. We need to track down what it is that is, has now failed or is about to fail catastrophically. So those sorts of things, it just proves, me and Brian didn't set that up in advance, but he knew what I was talking about. And I didn't even say burning. I said oxidization smell. That's what it smells like. So things like that, use the senses that you have, pay attention and then hone in on something. I'm sure Brian, this is another audio thing, so I'll pick on Brian, but how many times has someone said, I'm hearing feedback somewhere. I'm hearing feedback somewhere, only for you to mute everything. And what does it generally turn out to be if there's some sort of high-pitched feedback they think they're hearing?
Well, if it's a high-pitched thing, sometimes it's just like an electronic door scraping on something or a squeaking door. I've heard it's been all kinds, or maybe you're referring to the hearing aid feedback. That's another one that's big fun. We get that a lot in churches or any place that there are older people, and suddenly they have there's feedback coming from their hearing aid, and you can hear it even when you turn everything off. I have a really fun long story that I'll shorten to 2 sentences of a venue that I used to work in a lot that had this low frequency and I would like ring it out, and it would be gone, and it'd be great. And then we would actually do the event. It was this big atrium hall, hall kind of thing in one of the federal buildings in DC. And then, of course, the Department of Labor guy would come out and start into his speech with, and I start to and it's 200 hertz, and I'm just like I've got it all out of everything. Like it's still like a year worth of that before I finally figured out that all the way across the hall across the room and down a hall was a handicapped door that led into another part of the building that was only used occasionally, but every time you hit it, the servo on it went, oh, and it would echo through the whole entire thing. And it had nothing to do with the sound system, but it would come and go so that you would think, oh, I fixed it. And then 2 hours later, it would come back.
Yeah, those things, I've had elevators that made weird noises that have done that. I was thinking HVAC. I often get a vent somewhere in a venue, and it just in one spot it's making some kind of high-pitched noise or low-pitched noise, and that spot invariably is always where the client is sitting. So that's just something you can't deal with. But I was on a show, and the person, the client said, I keep hearing feedback, and I know it's not feedback. So I killed everything in the PA and said, do you hear it? They said, yes. I said, everything is muted. So I don't know what it is that you're hearing. Let me sit where you're sitting. And then when I sat where they were sitting, I was like, oh, I can feel some air on me. Oh, look, there's a vent above you. And that's what I think is causing the noise. So sometimes we have to troubleshoot other people's perceptions of their environment. So, but yes, those are common things that we might run into. It looks like we had a couple good comments coming in through Facebook, and it looks like Omar has joined us from a more stable location. So welcome, Omar. Thank you for getting in. Rick was saying, how about a golf cart sitting with the selector set to reverse? That drove him nuts on a show. Noah had said anything can be a fog machine if you use it wrong. Rick also said all electronics run on smoke. If the smoke comes out, it quits working. That's the magic smoke we don't want to see. Noah also says he was just at a venue where they kept moving the bike rack barricade every minute or two, and everyone thought it was feedback, and it was driving him nuts. So these are things you have to deal with. So sometimes you're troubleshooting things that aren't even actual things. They're just stuff that's happening in the environment, and it appears like things that you are doing wrong or that your gear is doing wrong. Leland.
I just want to touch on something since you mentioned smoke. As someone who worked a lot with fire and water damage restoration, what I discovered, anything that gets wet can become dry again. So when it comes to electronic devices, if you spill that glass of water on your keyboard, or you dump it on your control surface, or it ends up somewhere in your mixer, it doesn't mean your device has been totally destroyed. It can be recovered. So I'm just telling you from a professional perspective, first thing to do is get the power off immediately, unplug it, turn it off, whatever you have to do. Just don't push any buttons while it's still hot. That's going to save you from the most complicated problem, which is a fuse or pop. Once you hear that, you're pretty well toast, and you're going to have to replace the item. But if you don't hear that crack and pop, and you don't see any electrical sparks, you've got a 50-50 chance of saving that item. If you have to take it apart and clean it up. You can actually use detergent on top of the circuit boards if you need to, and bake them clean at less than 250 degrees in the oven if you have to. But you have to kind of know what you're doing to do that. But any drying unit, fans, anything like that will help. And don't use the device for at least 2 days, and it should work just fine after that. Water will not destroy your unit. Just make sure it's dry before you turn it back on.
Yeah, good call. Good call. Yeah, sometimes things seem worse than they are. But also, don't have any drinks near the equipment, please. If you want to get your hand smacked, you can do that on a show that I'm on, because I will absolutely smack your hand and move your drink. Probably spill it out too. So especially if it's like a $10 coffee from Starbucks or something, because I don't drink coffee. So, Bodie, what do you got?
So a couple things. One, what Noah was saying about the different color labeling. Absolutely. My graphics machines all get labeled with purple. My items that come into a vMix machine or an E2 all get labeled with green, go. Everything that gets labeled on the output end gets labeled, like, for instance, if I'm sending, from the E2 machine to a DSM, those get labeled red. I have a labeling for every single one. So when you pick up a cable and you go, okay, this is red, but this is coming from the E2 machine. Oh, this is a graphics machine, it's purple. Oh, this is the vMix machine because it's blue. Like, everything gets labeled. But the other thing too, like troubleshooting video, not that it's any more difficult than audio or anything like that, but like when something quits, you stop seeing the signal somewhere. Where did you lose that signal flow from? I start all the way back at the source, all the way back from the output source. Okay, my graphics machine, I lost my graphics machine in the downstage monitor. Okay, why did I lose it? Okay, it's still on the computer here. All right, it's still showing the extended display, so the decimator's still hooked up and it's seeing the decimator. Okay, let me hook an HDMI up to the decimator. I have a portable battery-powered monitor that I carry around with me. Hook up the HDMI to there. Okay, I'm seeing the signal here. Now let me go to the other end. Hook it up. Nope, no signal here. Oh, okay, the decimator's showing it's got power, but it's not receiving signal. Why? Well, let's start with swapping out the decimator. Take decimator, swap out decimator. Okay, bad decimator. Well, what happens when you swap it out? It still doesn't work. Well, first thing you should always check when you're doing that is to make sure they put, and tell me how many times this has happened too. They put the input to the output and the output to the input. Signal flow is a huge thing. And the more, everybody knows that I just started, 2 years ago. more and more that I'm getting on shows, more and more I'm realizing nobody knows signal flow, and it drives me up a wall. It's really, it really doesn't seem too freaking hard as far as I'm concerned. This machine is outputting a signal, so you need to input it down there. It's not hard, like, but it's something that basic that people forget or don't learn, and it ends up that way. The other thing too,
criticized as dyslexic though, because there are some out there that just can't help themselves. So.
Dyslexia is a totally different story. I understand there is a total, I get that, but I'm just talking like simple. They hooked everything up that way. It's like, okay, did you just not pay attention? Come on, I labeled on the end of it what it goes to. Like, that's how detailed the labeling gets that I put on it. It's like, okay, this is input decimator, and then on the HDMI side it will say output decimator. Like, I label it to that degree for them, because I've seen it 1,000 times. And then the other thing too is like another way I do it is if I lose it, if we're in the middle of a show, I always have a capture card hooked to my computer that if something goes out, like, oh, I can't see the DSM downstage, so the first thing I do is I hop an HDMI cable right into that capture card and view it in whatever I'm using, vMix, whatever, to where I can see the signal. If I can see the signal, then it's obviously nothing coming from this end. It's something downstage that we have to check out.
Bodie, so Rick on Facebook said, some people take how stupid can you be as a challenge. So just keep that in mind.
Well, there are people out there that are absolutely winning the game. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah. Brian, what do you got?
I'm just throwing this in only because to hop off of what Bodie was saying, this is part of my little rant, so forgive me. But if you're troubleshooting something and you swap out something and it doesn't fix the problem, put it back.
100%. 110%.
Because if you don't do that, for those who aren't following this, you could have put a bad something into the line, and then you go farther down the line and you can't find the thing that was bad in the first place because now you have two bad things.
Yeah.
So it's one of in the heat of the battle, it's one of those things that's so easy to skip because it's like, oh, I swapped out and that wasn't it. You move on to the next thing. It's like, no, take it with you. Put the decimator that you swap, put it back, plug it back in, go to the next thing. Because you don't, it's entirely, you could have checked that decimator that's in your hand 40 seconds ago. And it could have spontaneously broken in the time that it's just one of those, like, just by rule of things, just try a thing, then put back the original, go all the way down. And I have bitten myself on that one at least 2 or 3 times, where you then got all the way to the end of the line and you couldn't find the problem. And you're like, I've swapped out everything. And it's like, yeah, so at this stage you swapped in a bad one for a good one. And then in this stage, you swapped out a good one for the bad one, and you got to the end and it was still bad. And now you have to start at the beginning all over again because you don't know where in the chain you screwed yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that is definitely 100% true. I'll
add on to what Brian was just saying is when you are swapping things out, only swap one thing at a time. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people who will swap out the cable, the decimator, the cable after the decimator, and now we don't know which of those things was no good. So, and if it works, great. I mean, I guess you can finish your show. If it's still not working, well, now you have double the things you have to try and check, and you're going to run out of things to just swap. So don't firestorm it when you're trying to troubleshoot and try to replace everything. I used to do a lot of bench tech work at a theater, and I would get a whole comms, like somebody would have a bad belt pack or a bad headset or a bad cable, but they would just give me the whole thing and they'd replace all of it. And in a show, I can understand maybe you just need to get this thing to work, but it's a 50-50 shot if you're going to get a good or a bad one of those other things that you replace, like Brian was just saying. But I would get the whole thing back, and now I've got to test everything to see if I can recreate the issue and figure out what the bad thing was. And it's just, if you start with one thing. Okay, maybe the cable's bad. It looks a little janky. Let me swap the cable. Oh, great, it all works. Oh, well, that didn't solve the problem. So as Brian said, put the cable back. Now let's try the belt pack. Oh, okay, now it works. It was the belt pack. That's what you write NFG on and hand that to the bench tech guy. But just ripping everything out and trying everything at the same time is not troubleshooting. That's panicking, and it's not very efficient, and doesn't really tell you anything. Pete, what do you got?
The most important thing, and this is following up with what you were saying, Ed, and what Brian was saying about pulling too many things out to test. If you, especially on a big show, and if you got a crew you're working with to troubleshoot, communication is the number one thing here. Okay, figure out a plan on troubleshooting. I'll tell you a quick story. NASA, National Aeronautic Space Administration, has a contingency for almost everything. When they are launching a rocket, they have everything planned out actually in a book and not on a computer, because you can flip to page 501 quicker that way. The engineers that design stuff have tested it out, tested all different types of scenarios of where something can fail. My background is in occupational safety. When you are looking at a failure system, there was a system called failure mode in effect, or fault tree analysis. If you want to get very complex in figuring out where something would fail, you can use that system and learn how to troubleshoot. It's almost like a flow chart. Actually, a flow chart can be used in a lot of these situations. We've used it in a lot of manufacturing plants for making products or whatever. You can do the same thing with audio, video, and lighting and whatever you're using for an event. But communication is I think, the first thing. Make sure everyone's on the same page.
Absolutely. No, that's a great point. And that goes back to what we talked about with like labeling things, and yeah, communicating is absolutely important. Rick on Facebook, sorry, what was it? You know what? I'm going to get to actually Rick's thing in a little bit. So Rick, hang tight, because we are going to talk about test equipment and diagnostic stuff in a second. Omar, go ahead.
So I have one I wanted to add into the mix here, just to get us a little back to video world. But something Brian had said actually kind of reminded me of this that I do for video. So as an audio, where you're troubleshooting, specific for audio problems, right? In video, I'm always trying to give myself visual cues for troubleshooting. So on an LED wall, and I'll use my box here to kind of draw it out. But if I'm doing an LED wall, I tend to do power left to right. Right, and then I'll come up and I'll come down, I'll come up and I'll come down, and I'll come down. I do this so that if my data is going in this direction and I have a data problem, my data is left to right. And I run power up and down, so that if I have a wall that goes out up and down, it's a power issue. So for me, on the front end or the back end, it's a very quick visual of what is happening. And because the problem is, a lot of people I see, they'll run power and data the same direction, right? They'll follow it through to make it easier for themselves. What happens then, though, is that if the LED wall does go down for any reason, you don't know which one it is. Was it power or was it data? So this is a very quick way for me to figure out what is what. Another way also is, learning to read some of those tile things in the background. But that's something I do visually that I think helps out a lot on shows, because when I'm in that position, a lot of times, that's the one thing that saves me big time. So for me, that's a very helpful tip to really kind of troubleshooting things, again, on the fly. And in that show mode where you're the go-to is to solve an issue, and that makes it very quick to say, hey, it's a power issue. Let me jump to this part of the LED wall with this section to figure that out, versus, well, I don't know which one it is, so let me start going down the chain of 1,000 different things. And back to what Iris was kind of getting to, and we've all talked about a bunch of times here, right, is really troubleshooting one thing at a time. So that eliminates me having to troubleshoot multiple things and just focus on one problem in one section. Just wanted to throw that in there because I remembered about it about 30 minutes ago, and has been on my brain. Thanks, Brian.
Right, and that goes back to the systems. Have a system. That's a great system that Omar has come up with, so he can quickly identify if he's having a power versus a signal issue on an LED wall. That's an absolute golden tip. Totally worth the price of admission for today. Sorry, who's Leland? Your hand was up.
Yeah, that was me, because I got a bail here, Ed, but there was one thing I wanted to touch on that we haven't already in one way or another, because it is kind of a written rule, and I'm just going to put it on the screen and read through it before I take off. This is the basic troubleshooting process, and it's 5 easy steps. If you can remember these steps, it's basically what you're going to deal with. Identify the problem, establish a theory of the probable cause, test the theory to determine the cause, establish a plan of action to resolve the problem and implement the solution, and then 5, verify the full system functionality, and if it's applicable, implement the preventative measures after the fact. So we kind of tell ourselves, if we found a problem, we want to make sure it never happens again. So what do? We implement a strategy to make sure that what we ran into that time can be marked off the list, that that's not going to happen next time. So with that, I'm going to bail. Thanks for having me, everybody, and continue on. I'm sure we'll catch you next time. Enjoy the show.
Thanks, Leland. That was great. Those were great tips. I wish I had that text to put into the chats. So I don't know if you have it, and if you can throw it in a message to me so I can get it out there. If you have it easily copy and pastable, I'll absolutely put that out there. Thank you. Cool. Sorry, who else? Somebody else had their hand up a second ago, I think, before, or maybe not. Great. Okay. So,
no, but piggybacking off of that slide that Leland just showed, that's what led to the ultimatum of me color coding my systems, was because of that. It's like, okay, why does this keep happening? Well, because nobody knows what cable's going where. Yeah, it's labeled, but it's labeled graphics machine. Okay, well, what graphics machine? Okay, well, graphics machine 1 is now purple. Graphics machine 2 is now yellow. You know, it might say GFX on it, but it's GFX 2 with a yellow tag. It's GFX 1 with a purple tag. And it's done that way because, okay, why does it keep? Well, let's make this simpler to figure out what's going on. Let's label everything and make it a color-coded system. So that way, when you replace it, if you have to replace it, you replace it with the same tagging. So that way, if it happens again, which it shouldn't, at least you know, okay, well, now we've replaced the cable in the second time now. What's going on? Okay, we have a bug in the machine. The machine's not reading the decimator properly, which I absolutely had. I've had 2 or 3 times I've had to take out the laptop because for whatever reason, the HDMI port was not supporting the signal on it. So that's like those 5 troubleshooting steps ultimately led to the fact that let me color code this stuff so that way, okay, I replaced this yellow wire twice now. Why? You know.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. So whether you do color coding or some other type of system, yeah, having a way to identify each piece, especially if there are multiples of similar, like you have multiple laptops or whatnot. One of the things I've gotten in the habit of, I don't remember who I kind of inherited this habit from, but in a show, typically there might be a graphics machine, and they might be, a playback machine, right? And they might be referred to as playback 1 and playback 2. There might be a graphics machine that either get called main and backup, or also get called 1 and 2. So what I try to do is I try to really push the show caller to label them something different. So if I have playback that are 1 and 2, then I want my graphics machines to be A and B, and something else to be another nomenclature that's not any of those. So I know for Playback Pro is actually labeled in my Stream Deck, in my companion. I do X and Y as my Playback Pro main and backup. So that way you're not. I know Playback sometimes is they use colors like blue or red. So whatever it is, try to have different things so that when you're getting called, hey, I'm having a problem with 1. You don't have to know what the mumbled part was versus I'm having a problem with A. Well, okay, that gives you some information. And I know, Brian, actually, I think you just talked about that in a class a couple of weeks ago. So that's right. Yeah. You and I know I heard it somewhere else. I've been doing it for a while, but yeah, that it reaffirmed that other great people are doing something similar. Omar, it looked like you were gonna chime in with something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and maybe I got the idea from you actually, because now that you're saying it, it totally rings a bell. But I have recently, in the last this year at least, so the last few months, I've gotten rid of pretty much using numbers and just using the alphabet now. So all my cables are labeled A, B, Z, D, E until I get to Z, and then once I get to Z, which is not very often, I just go, and now the next one's A, A, B, B, C, C. Like I just double it up, and that makes it very easy for me to find stuff on the fly, like Bodhi was saying earlier. But to your point, Ed, I do now do it when I do numbering, since it's generally just 1 and 2, right? Playback 1, playback 2, primary and backup. It's 1A, 1B, and then graphics is 1C, 1D. That way it's a kind of in a nomenclature. I might have got that idea from you actually, now that because you totally reminds me. But I was like, I was gonna ask the audience here or the people online if anybody does that, or are you guys still using numbers, and if so, why? But it sounds like Pete might have a response.
So I've used both. For the number 0, I use the 0 with a slash through it. For the number 7, I put the slash through that. You got to be careful with using the letter G, the lowercase g, and the number 6 and the number 9, because if it's upside down,
Oh, very good points.
you may read it wrong. What I have seen is if you have a number 9 or number 6, they put an underline underneath the number. That way, you got to look at it this way and not this way. For coding stuff, when I call the show, I kind of go by scene. Scenes 100. Scene 1 is 100s. Scene 2 is 200s, etc. I don't like going 1, 2, 3, 4 throughout an entire show, because if you need to edit or modify stuff, it takes time to find another number. I know some people do that. I don't like doing that. I like using 100s for that. But
I like that.
But programming stuff in the computer, I mean, that's kind of obvious. I kind of write up my cues with that. But like what I said, with the numbers and the letters, big capital letters are best instead of lowercase for cables. Okay. I've seen a lot of shows. Some stuff is labeled, some stuff isn't. Maybe color coded. I mean, anything goes. I don't think there's any standard right now anywhere of color coding anything, and I've kind of asked that question for a number of years now, and I think our industry really needs to kind of start color coding stuff.
So there is one that in video everybody uses, which is RGB HV. That's kind of our go-to. So red, green, blue, white, black is kind of like an always just go-to number. But something you had said here reminded me about something that Chris and me do for NDI. So if anybody's listening to this, is another golden nugget. If you guys are doing anything with NDI and using vMix or anything, we need to identify which machine you're on, change the PC name to what you're using it for, so that on the NDI stream itself, it shows up as that name. We did, during pandemic, we did a lot of stuff, and then all of a sudden it became like, it's so complicated to find what's what. And then Chris was like, why don't we just start naming these? And I was like, yes. So that has been the standard moving forward. So if you guys aren't doing that with your NDI feeds right now, that's a big kind of just like eye opener, because it just pops up and that's the one I need to use. Great, push it into here.
That's
Brian,
that's a great tip. Yeah, Brian, I think you perked up when he was talking about a standard for color coding. Is that?
Okay, so I perked up because I just wanted to just jump on something that Omar said, because as an audio guy, it was just too delicious to let go. But he said a standard that video uses is RGBHV, red, green, blue, white, black. And I'm not sure how HV gets to white black.
So
I actually do know, but yes, I'm just teasing you. But it does go to suck back to more of a macro level of labeling conventions that make perfect sense to you, and by you I mean anyone, may not make any sense to someone else because they're not coming from the same space that you're coming from. And so it's just, again, I'm not saying that you were wrong. I totally get where you were coming from. And I've worked with video crews, and like, I get it. And for those who don't know, old component, video systems, the last two colors weren't always the same. It was horizontal, vertical, but sometimes they're white, black, sometimes they're black, yellow. Like it's there's, and so it's just, if you're a video person, like you get this, like this is like, oh, but yeah, I understand this. If you're an audio person, you're like, but you said white and it says H on it, and I don't know what to do with that. Like that doesn't make sense to me.
Heliotrope.
Right. The whole there isn't a standard color code thing is another giant rant that I won't bore anyone with. I am personally a proponent of using resistor color code for any color code that corresponds to a number. It's only for the reason that it is an existing code that has been around for generations now. It hasn't changed. It's the same thing. It's a standard. It's not coming from audio or video or lighting or NASA or anything else. It's just a very standard electronics code. And I'm a big fan of using that for everything, but we're a long ways from standardizing on that. I know that. But all my cables are labeled with resistor color code for anybody who cares.
I'll sometimes use Roy G. Biv. Because people know that too. More people know that these days than know the resistor color code.
I don't know that.
Just
What is that? Educate me.
Roy G. Biv. That's the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet.
Never heard
Roy
that.
G. Biv.
Never heard that in my 35 years of existence. I've never heard that.
Hold
Awesome.
on. How
Today
have
is
you
the day.
never heard it? And we went to the same damn high school, and I learned it in high school.
Wait, hold on, Bodie. You learned that in high school, not like elementary school?
Elementary
Well,
school.
It was more instilled with high school than it was with elementary school. Elementary school was taught as far as your like primary colors and your secondary colors and pattern colors and things like that. But in high school, especially in theater, it was instilled the Roy G. Biv spectrum when you're trying to do lighting.
Yeah, no, I was just teasing. I want to go back to something. I think it was Pete who said it. Somebody mentioned NASA. One of the other things I constantly say, especially in lately in the virtual space, when I go over with a remote presenter, like what we're going to do in the event something happens, like giving them a dial-in phone number or something, I always tell them, I like to be like NASA and have backups for the backups, because that's a very NASA thing. It usually gets a little chuckle, but that's something I say all the time is have a backup for your backup, and make sure your backups work, because nothing bothers me more than when you get on site and someone's like, oh, this one doesn't work so well. We'll just make that one the backup. And I'm like, well, then when your main one fails, you've given yourself a crutch for a backup, something you know that isn't already working. So that doesn't make it an actual backup. So, yes. And then something else I was going to, since we were talking about labeling and numbering. So one of the things I do, another system thing, is this is just an XLR cable. So I usually take it with what would be the top. This is a Soundcraft, a Switchcraft one, which I don't like. That's why I didn't mind. I was going to take it apart. But I wrote Pod 1 on it for Podium 1. And I always label my cables so that when it's plugged into something, so I'm just using my Q box, is that you can read it from the angle it is plugged in. So and at the top, I always So when I do network cable, I kind of usually wait to label them until I figure out if the tab is going up or the tab is going down. If it's a network switch or some sort of piece of gear. And then I make sure the label can be read from the way that the cable will naturally be laying into that piece of gear when it's seated. And I write it so that you can read it as that's going into the piece of gear. That's just my system because, I don't want there to be confusion with anybody else who's going to read my labeling when I say, hey, go find the XLR with podium 1 on it, and the label's upside down and backwards, and I want there to be no confusion. I want it to be like, oh, look, there it is, and it's done. So those are just a couple things I wanted to go back to that before I forgot and we got too far. And now that I've shown something, I want to talk about some of our diagnostic tools or some of the things we use to diagnose once we realize we have a problem and figuring out what that problem is. So I'll start just since I am showing it and I have it, but this is a Qbox. So a lot of audio people know what this is. There's all sorts of different types of these things. Is it the Silver Bullet is the other one that's gotten kind of popular? I think that's what it's called. Which does a lot of the same things. This can create a 400 hertz tone, so you can use it to send some signal. What's kind of cool, I actually just set up another XLR line that I put some phantom power on. So this will give me lights and let me know that my phantom power is there. And why that's kind of cool is I can know if I have connectivity between all. Right now, I would know from just by looking at these two lights that there's at least connectivity on this cable on all 3 of the pins, 1, 2, and 3, because phantom power can't pass without the ground, so the ground has to be there. And then these 2 lights correspond to pin 1 or pin 2. So I've got voltage there, so I know that this cable at least is passing connectivity from the thing that it's plugged into, which happens right now to be my Rio. So again, this let me diagnose if I was having some sort of issue that at least this cable plugged into this one piece of gear has connectivity without me having to get out a cable tester and unplug. I just popped this onto the end of it and boom. And then if this is plugged into my Rio, for example, I can send tone down it and then hear that back at the console or cue it in my ears or whatever it is. And then that might tell me, oh, the thing that was plugged into the end of this before I plugged my Qbox in, that might have been the issue if I wasn't getting any sound or whatever it was. So I use the Qbox a lot. I worked in a theater that had patch bays in our because it was a installed system and it had TT. And what a lot of people don't know is that little hole is a TT patch point. So you can listen to TT, which is tiny telephone, Bantam little patch points. And yeah, it's very useful for what it is. One of the other things I use for this, I can unplug and I'll show you. And there's a couple generations of this one. This one, I think, is the 2nd or 3rd generation. I don't know if they've done a revision after that. But you can connect these XLRs so you can loop through it. I've actually, in a pinch, used this. I've given one of these to a teleprompter operator because there's a little speaker in it so you can hear stuff. And I've given it to them so they could hear when we didn't have like a little Fostex or something. And they were able to plug in their little headphones to it. But what I really like about it is you can listen to pin 2, pin 3, or pin 2 and 3. So if a mic cable, like Brian talked about earlier, if something just doesn't sound right, say it sounds like super thin, to me that tells me that it could be one of my conductors is not connected, is floating, maybe pin 2 or pin 3, and it sounds thin. It could be half-legging it, as it's called. So by plugging into here and listening to it and listening to pin 2 or pin 3, I can tell if I have signal on both without having to open up the cable and do all that. So something like this helps me do a lot of diagnostics pretty quickly when I'm on a job and we have to get the show up fast and we're having some sort of issue. So with that, I'll open it up to anybody else who has other things they use often, or Brian, if you want to talk more about cue boxes or any other toys.
Just a quick add-on to, only because it tags exactly on where you just were. The same 2-3 switch can be used to check analog intercom. So if you're checking ClearCom, signal should be on 3. If you're checking RTS and it's kind of traditional 2-channel RTS, there'll be a channel on 2 and a different comms channel on 3. And you can plug in your intercom and check, and you can even use it to make sure that things are thumb wheeled in the right places by just taking a line before you even get a belt pack and just plug it in and go, okay, that's getting production, that's getting whatever. So just another, and it will show if there is voltage on the line from intercom on the same phantom power line, same phantom power lights that it will for cue boxes. For what they are, still an incredibly useful little tool. Very easy to very, very hard to break, and lots of cool things you can do with them.
Yep, absolutely. And for somewhere around the $250, $275, $300 range, it's it's a very useful tool if you're a serious audio person to have in your kit. Just in arm's reach, we talked earlier about power. So one of the things I also carry with me all the time is just a simple outlet tester. This one I have, of course it doesn't reach. Oh yeah, it does. So I just have an extra power strip that I plugged into power. See, it lights up, and there's a chart here that tells me what those lights mean. That this will let me know that the outlet is wired correctly or not wired correctly. And you should do this. I do this anytime I'm on a generator. Anytime I'm on a generator, I make sure I test the outlets before I plug in any gear to it. This particular one, it's hard to see, but the LCD also gives me a readout of the voltage. So there are other simple ones that just kind of tell you what's if that the outlets are wired correctly. But having the voltage readout is kind of nice as well. So if you have, if you're not getting the full voltage to your rack, or if you're getting too much voltage, you'll kind of have an idea of that before you start plugging stuff in. Iris.
Since everyone's showing off their testers, I have a question.
Sure.
I have a testing box. I can test my HDMI cables and everything else. What I've been looking for is a tester for the HDMI port, because our computers are getting older, it keeps losing color, and my cables are fine. So I'm looking for a tester I can plug into the port, but I haven't found one. Any thoughts? Anyone own one?
For just see if the HDMI port itself is working, right? That's it?
To see if all the pins in the port are working, yeah.
Oh, that's a good one. I was thinking something for a second, but it doesn't do the same thing you're asking for.
I haven't found one. So I figured someone might know, or not.
Or someone who's much smarter than we are invent it.
They do have a port tester, but they're okay. So for people who repair like gaming consoles or repair computers, they do have an HDMI port tester. They're about $500-$600 for the ones that I know of, and it simply just plugs in and it tells you if it's sending the it sends a signal back to the console to make sure that all the pins are connecting properly. So they do make one. They're kind of expensive because they're one of those things that aren't in demand to be used, because let's be fair and honest, a lot of things nowadays are made so cheaply that when they stop registering properly, people just throw them away and replace them. That's the mindset that people have gotten to. So therefore, it's not as in demand to have one. So
yeah, unfortunately, they're not replacing my computers. I work in a high school. We have no money.
Understand that.
Yeah, that's a bummer. That is a tricky one though. That'd be cool if there was a more affordable thing other than just plug it into something and see if you get signal or not. Because that could be a bunch of different issues. That's hard to confirm. Anybody else have any interesting? Pete, what do you got?
So I was talking about troubleshooting with a diagram. If you want to take time to work it out, let me see if I can punch it up here. Fault tree analysis is a simple system if you know your basic logic symbols. This one here is called an OR, O-R. So that means input. If you have an input signal on 1 or 2, you get an output here. This is called an AND, A-N-D. That means you need a signal on 3, 4, and 5 to get an output on it. And then the most simple one, a flow chart, which we used back in the 1980s to program computer language. Pretty simple. Lamp doesn't work. Is it plugged in? No, yes, and then you continue. But you have to draw this out for every specific point in your system so you know how it works.
No, that's a great tip. Absolutely, and I think on very complex systems, it is a good idea to make notes of, especially in a show, it may be hard to do a diagram like that, but at least make notes of what you've tried and what you haven't. I've commissioned systems before, and that's when we have punch lists where we go through each thing, and I've had to painstakingly go through hundreds and hundreds of patch points to verify that installations were done correctly, and then repair what wasn't. So yeah, that's having a list is absolutely a good idea to keep yourself honest, and so you don't miss anything, so something doesn't fall through the cracks. Brian, it looked like you were you going to say something? Did
I have that look on my face? I was
You did.
I was mostly just like visually agreeing with you.
Great.
One of the things I was just thinking like traps that are easy to fall into, and one of them is assuming that something it's not that, like it's never that, and so you skip it. If you are wanting to, you set up a system and you want to check it and make sure to just sort of skip over a thing of, well, I know that part's okay. Like you just were talking about systematically having to go through 1,500 patch points to verify if you don't verify it, you don't know for sure that it was working to begin with. And I have a long involved, I can make it super entertaining or boring story that ends with, it turned out to be the SM58 was broken.
Which you would never think. You would never think a 58 didn't work.
Which is of course the point of the story. And in troubleshooting, I skipped the microphone because it was an SM58. There's no way it's that, and it was a very complicated, many multi-pins, many splits, old analog days, like 400 places there could be a fault that I painstakingly went through, and then went through again because I didn't find it, then went through again because I didn't find it, and then finally was like, well, I know it's not the microphone, but tried a new microphone, and boom, opened it up, and one of the wires had fallen off of one of the, so, and it was just a like definite huge lesson of don't assume anything. It would have taken me 4 seconds to go, well, I'm sure it's not the SM58, but let's swap that out just in case. I'm starting at this end of this of this chain. I'm starting at the microphone, so fine, swap it out, and I would have been done. And I would have had no story to tell, but I would have been done. So yeah, don't make assumptions that, well, I just put that in place, or I just bought that, or it just came out of the box, or it's never that, or any other thing you want to include, because that's how you get yourself into trouble. It's, systematically going through from one end of the chain to the other and checking every single thing, even though you're sure it's not that. Because the number of times that I have found out that it was indeed that, or I'm sure I didn't do that when in fact I did do that, is, the other, like, just don't make assumptions, because there's a saying with assume and something, you, me, something, anyway. I don't know. Maybe you're familiar.
Absolutely. One of the things I spent a lot of time when I was doing some bench tech work, I spent sometimes almost as much time verifying my test rig as I did testing the thing that I thought was broken. So, if your test is not valid, then you're working off flawed data. So you need to make sure that the test you're doing is the appropriate test and that your testing equipment is actually working. So, so one of the things I'm going to show right now is my cable tester. This is I've had this for 20 years or so, and it's just a simple cable tester. It does XLR, it does NL4, RCA, BNC, 5-pin DIN, 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch. So handful of things. But whenever I was testing a piece of gear that came back, the first thing I would do is I would plug in a cable that I'm going to use as the testing cable, and I'll go through. Do I get the right lights? Yep, there we go. It's funny that the green is keying out with my green screen. But something just as simple as this at least lets me know that this cable is working. And Leland had mentioned it much earlier, I think, in the pre-show. The other test you do is the shake test. Once you have a cable in a tester, shake it around a lot. Make sure that it's working. And, this one, I have to actually go through pin by pin. There are other ones that give you a readout of all your pins at the same time. But, give it a good shake. Make sure that it is, in fact, not intermittent. Because that's the worst kind of problem to diagnose. A problem that isn't a consistent problem. When you have an intermittent problem, it's much harder because sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So proving that it's not a problem right now doesn't mean you've proved that it's not going to be a problem later. It's like the whole proving a negative thing doesn't work. But yeah, so these sorts of things are good to have. A cable tester. Again, in the field, maybe you're not going to test your cable, especially if you've run out a 100-footer and it's going to be faster to replace that cable. But when you get back to the shop, you make sure you label the cable that wasn't working, and then somebody should be testing that cable to see, was it the cable, or does that cable now get chopped up into much smaller cables because there's a short in it somewhere, and things like that. So that's a thing. I also have some adapters to make it easier to test things. For example, I have a speak-on to 1/4 inch adapter that I use so that I can very quickly kind of test stuff, with a more common, if I come across a cable tester that doesn't have, speak on it, then I can, adapt both ends, and boom, now I've got something that tells me if it works right. And knowing how my adapters are wired, I can tell, okay, is the tip actually going to +1, or is it reversed, or is it not there? So certain things, I custom make things if I need them to do the tests that I need to do. I think I saw Bodie, and then did I see Iris's hand too? We'll get to you next. Oh, nope, she's shaking me off. So Bodie, go ahead.
So one of the things I take with me, it's actually in my car. It's not in the house right now. I actually have Ethernet tester. When you're ever on site and you're running any of these shows and the house or venue provides you internet, we actually had cables come out and we connect them. And it's like, okay, I'm not seeing anything. Why am I not seeing anything? Or I'm seeing the internet, but I'm only running at 10 megs. Why am I only running at 10 megs? And it was supposed to be a 100 meg signal. Okay, hook it up to the Ethernet tester. Okay, pin 4 is not connected properly. So whoever made the cable didn't connect the pinning right on it. So I always have an Ethernet tester with me. I do carry a power connector tester as well. We got to hook up here. Okay, there's power here. We're good. But I always bring an Ethernet tester whenever I'm doing anything like that. And if for whatever reason it's not doing what it's supposed to do, I've just gotten to the point now when the venue drops the line, I check the cable right from there and see what it's sending me in the tester before I even hook it up now. You're muted.
Sorry, I'm trying not to keep it open while I'm fumbling around at grabbing things that are at arm's length. So I have my I have one set that is just connectivity of Ethernet. So it's got a RJ45 and an RJ11, so it could also test a phone line if I needed to. And then the other end has the same. And it just tells me if I have connectivity. So it doesn't do any speed or anything. It's just testing the copper. But that's still sometimes enough. I was just on a show in Florida where we had an access point that wasn't registering. So all I did was I actually used I have another one that's a little nicer. All I did though was run this basic thing, and all this does, and this was cheap from Home Depot, is it runs through. I might have one of them upside down, so I'm trying to see if, yeah, there we go. That way it wasn't confusing. So if those didn't light up, if there was a problem on that cable, that pin just wouldn't light up. And it's super simple, nothing difficult, nothing complex. Again, not telling me speeds or anything, but it'll let me know, and I can say, oh, that cable needs to be re-terminated, or we just need a new cable, whatever it is. And then being that it's kind of a multi-thing, this can also be used for toning out lines. So if I don't know where something is plugged in, I have a dozen lines, I can plug in this end and then take this wand and then go find the cable by running it over a cable like this, and it'll beep if it's connected to it, if it's got some inductance. And then I don't have it that at hand, but I've got a couple adapters that come off to alligator clips and things like that plug into this end. So if I have to touch bare wires, I can go find them, or again, telephone or something like that. So these are things that I carry, which is what Rick's question was earlier, or Rick's comment on Facebook back that I said I would get to. He said, how important I think he meant to you, is the thing to carry, or how much, I'm trying to understand what he's saying, but it's basically to carry enough test equipment that you can check whatever system you are using at all the points along the line. So I carry a lot of test equipment. I carry more test equipment probably than I get paid to carry. But because I can test and fix things and assess things, it keeps me busy. I get hired a lot because I've got the tools at hand. I mean, I'm grabbing things that are just within my arm's reach in my house right now to show you guys. And I carry those things with me. Sometimes it's where do you draw the line? And sometimes I throw different things in my bag. But I have a whole little fiber kit, that has a fiber fault tester. And I bought it for one specific job, and I didn't even use it on that job. But then I brought it with me I've been bringing it with me, and then I finally used it on another job. And if I didn't have that, that would have been a big problem, because somehow I ended up the fiber tech when I wasn't supposed to be. So, and I think it was because I had the tools, because nobody else had tools. Nobody else had a fault finder or a fiber meter that could read, what signal strength you're getting. So I think it's important. I bring a lot of tools with me. I like to be able to figure out what's wrong if I have a problem. I don't like to just be like, I don't know, let's just replace the thing until we find out, what it was that didn't work. I like to be able to diagnose stuff and then give the shop guy some sort of idea of what was wrong. And I think I made a comment earlier about labeling things NFG, but I always write on that tag also, I think it's this, or tested and it's this, so that the person who gets it in the shop can look at it and say, oh, somebody went through the trouble and tested. Oh yeah, I verified that is the problem. It also saves me getting a phone call later because they've figured out what I already figured out on site. Brian, and then Pete.
Yeah, my quick comment, this applies across the board. Any tag on anything that has anything to do with whether something is working or not working, packed or not packed, complete or not complete, anything like that, putting your initials and the date on it is invaluable to the people who come after you for 1,000 different reasons. So, not, not working, maybe a wild ass guess of what you think it is, but then usually just your initials is enough. They can figure out who that is and the date, so that if that tag is still stuck on there 3 months later, somebody can say, I think this has probably been fit. It's just, otherwise things get, or they come off this and end up stuck on something else or whatever.
Or someone replaces the cover on the speaker case, but they put the tag on the speaker case and not the speaker itself. So it's not even the right speaker anymore.
Yeah, that's a great point. Label the thing, not the case it's in. Pete, you had your hand up before?
Yeah, what our industry needs is, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, and you mentioned it, Ed, and I'm sure everyone else has gone through this. You have a tester for audio, a tester for video, a tester for electricity, a tester for internet, a tester for this, that, and the other. We need one device that can test everything. Remember the old Star Trek TV show? They had the tricorders. That's what we need. Every connection on it, it has a little screen. You can see video. You can test video. You can test whatever on it. That's what our industry needs.
If we're taking Star Trek tech, I would actually rather have the transporter so that the gear just never has to get lifted again. That would be... of course, I'll still probably be the guy who has to lift it onto the transporter. That'll be, that'll be what I have to do. I did happen to find my little clippy that goes into my thing with alligator clips, so now I can clip it onto bare wires or other sorts of terminals. I did find my optical multimeter, which is what does my fiber. So this actually can be a light source, and it can read. And I bought two of the same one, again, so I can test my tester. So when I have to test it, I can use the light source from this, feed out into the other meter, and get a reading on a known good piece of fiber that's short, and get the level that this is putting out. Then I take this to the other end and make it the light source that sends the lights from the far end. And then I can say, oh, I've got loss of light, or I've got the same amount of light coming through, and yay, I've verified that this cable is not creating any loss. It's not dirty or whatever. And then, of course, I do have a fault-finding pen. This just pushes light down, and I could use this to measure. I could measure this instead, but this lets me see if there's a break in the fiber. So those kinds of things are just useful to have if you're using fiber. Have fiber tools. If you're using CAT, have CAT tools, whatever it is. This one happens to do both. So this little thing has its own little plug, and it'll do the same thing that other yellow one I showed you will do for CAT 5, 6, 7, whatever it is. But yeah, these tools are super important. I think, Pete, you had earlier mentioned a multimeter. This is another hugely useful tool. This one happens to be a Radio Shack one. I've had it for a while. And, people might say, oh, Radio Shack, that was cheap junk. This is a true RMS meter. So this is actually a pretty good meter. And if you don't know what a true RMS meter is, Wiki does, or Google does. So you can look that up, and you can understand why this is good. The reason I sought out, and I have another true RMS one somewhere else, a true RMS meter, was when I was commissioning a recording studio. I wanted to be able to calibrate all of the outputs of the interface to have the same output voltage and calibrate the input voltage. And the way to do that accurately is with a true RMS meter. I've actually gone and done that on my QL1 and my Rio. I've made sure that all of my outputs are calibrated. I did it painstakingly, and the way I did that was with a true RMS meter. I'm not going to get into the how of that, but the true RMS meter was what let me do it. Omar, go ahead.
And I have audio guys on here, so please help me remember some of this information. I remember a time, this was years ago, probably like 10 years ago. If you with an electrical meter, you can test, because they look very similar, right? An SDI cable for an antenna and an SDI cable for video look the same, but they don't carry the same impedance down the line. And what you could do is with an electrical, with the machine, you can run it, you can go to both ends, and 75 ohms is an SDI cable, and I believe it's 57 is audio. And if you would run the line, it would tell you which one you were at. You could tell whether that was for SDI or HDMI. And I remember we had to do the scenario. I remember the owner of the company had us do the scenario because they had mixed stuff on the way back in cases, and they couldn't determine which was for the audio and which was for video. So we ended up running this test, and I thought it was ingenious. And I just remember doing it that one time, but it was kind of one of those like, oh shit, this is good to know for the future. I don't know if I got those ohms exactly right. I know 75 is for video. I don't 100% remember audio is 57 or 58, something like that. But when we ran it down the lines, and they were all about 50 feet to 100 feet, the audio ones instantly jumped down to the right one, and we're like, okay, this is for audio. Boom. So fun fact.
Cool. Very cool. Sorry. Anybody else have anything to add? I know Brian was listening to that, and I think I understood what Omar was going for, but yeah, go ahead.
I think he's specifically referring to a 75 ohm BNC cable versus a 50 ohm BNC cable that's traditionally used for RF for audio.
Yes.
And absolutely, a good old fashioned multimeter can tell you one from the other, because some of the more modern wires actually say it but most of them don't. And the connectors are slightly different, which is another clue, but it's very, very slightly different. The pin is a slightly different size, so that you can literally use them interchangeably. Anyway, we're the huge rabbit trail. But no, that's a really good application of a multimeter, which is, I was going to circle back, and Ed beat me to it, of probably the most basic, no matter what your discipline is, no matter what it is that you're in, you should have a multimeter in your toolkit. It's just, even if it just comes down to, I need to test a battery to see if it's good. Like, if you get a decent one, and you can spend $150 for one, you don't have to get a, $4,000 fluke. Like, you can get something that's decent for $100, and it will last you for 20 years, and you will just find yourself using it over and over and over again. The last little thing I'm going to say is just a reiteration of what Ed has already said 4 different times, but I'm going to say it one more time because it just gets forgotten so easily, and that is, the first step in troubleshooting is always test your tester. Always, every time, every single time, never skip it. Always test your tester. When you break out your cue box, turn it on and put tone on it and have it go me, and you go, okay, cue box is working. Now I'm going to go do something with it, because the battery could be dead. It could have failed between the last time you used it. The switches could be in a weird configuration because it bumped into something. There's 100 different things it can be, and you don't want to burn 20 minutes of troubleshooting and then look down and realize that the battery's dead on your stupid tester. And you just wasted 20 minutes of your time, and you have to go back and start all over again. Ask me how I know. So every time, test the tester. Oh, I just ran a troubleshooting thing 5 minutes ago with this. I don't care. Test it again before you start to do something else. It's 5 seconds, worth it every time. If all anyone remembers from this 2-hour conversation is test my tester first, it was worth the 2 hours of time.
Absolutely. 100% agree. Yep. And beyond testing the tester is also, are you testing the thing is your test a valid test? I watch the problem I see a lot too, especially on some of the user groups on Facebook and other places, is someone will be like, oh, well, if you do this, that'll tell you if that's what's wrong. And it's like, well, no, that could tell you one thing that might be wrong, but not necessarily the whole story. So sometimes, you have to evaluate your testing criteria and method to make sure that it's a valid thing. Because again, if you are making decisions based on poor data, then you're making poor decisions. So that's kind of the thing to think about. Sorry, did anybody? Yeah, Omar. I knew I saw somebody's hand. Go ahead.
No worries. So I just wanted to add, we're about to wrap up here in about 10 minutes. So if you guys have any final questions on the social media side between YouTube and Facebook, please drop them in there right now before we wrap up. But I want to kind of point out the elephant in the room here that everybody's saying here in different versions of it, but it's still giving us the information for you guys. That one of the key things is everybody's giving out great information about how to troubleshoot on the fly when we're in a show mode. And some of the things you guys are hearing, like from Ed and from Brian and from Pete today, that really dove into some nitty gritty stuff is from experience and doing things and learning the difference between one hum versus another hum. But the main point here is that these guys have taken the time, and if you're new to this, you should be doing the same thing, to troubleshoot one thing at a time so that they learn from it after that one time. Not, let me change out 5 things. Oh, we solved it, but you don't know what solved it. So now the next time it happens, you have no idea what the solution is. If you do the process, which I know it takes time, and I know it's oh my God, it's so much work. But if you take the time to do one thing at a time and figure it out, the next time it comes up, you instinctively have the experience and say, oh, it could be just this. Let me check that real quick. And if it's not, then you have a new problem to solve. And as time goes, you become quicker and quicker at troubleshooting and problem solving because you've gained the experience. But that's still foundational knowledge of doing it one step at a time is what we're all trying to drill to you guys. And yes, there's little tricks in here and tricks there to get things going. And I'm sure Iris is probably dealing with this more than anybody because she's a teacher right now and how to really kind of drill that into her students. But for you guys that are watching with us tonight, it's really about taking the steps, taking the process so that you build on that knowledge and build on those experiences so that when you do run into something, you have this plethora of knowledge in the back of your mind already because you've gone through this already. And unfortunately, it's going to happen. And every show it's going to happen. You can never get around it. You can always just prepare yourself and be ready for it. And the other key takeaway here is also be prepared. I want to play devil's advocate and be like, there's somebody here who's watching that saying like, oh, that's not my responsibility to buy any of these things. That's the company's job. The reality is it's not. They're hiring you because you're the professional. And if you want to present as a professional, come with the professional gear you need to be a professional. Don't just show up with yourself and be, I need all this stuff. And like, well, what'd you bring to do your job? I know a lot of high-end guys who bring a ton of gear, including myself, including everybody here. They come with a whole Pelican case full of gear to do their job to the best of their abilities, not to rely on the client because that's not what the client's there for. You're going to fight this all day long, and you're going to fight it to the day you're in the grave. But I promise you, and everybody here will agree with this, if you want to be professional in this industry, bring the gears to make you a professional, to test what you have to test out, to do your QC process properly, to do your everything properly. Don't just think that the client's going to provide it for you because they're not. And if they do, great, it's a good client. If they don't, it's still your job. That's all I got. Sorry, I just wanted to like drill home some points here that people, I feel like need to sometimes be, apparent of.
Yeah, well, you wouldn't expect a plumber to ask you to borrow your wrench when they come to fix your sink, 100%. But now, and with that said, I'm not saying bring every tool possible to diagnose every scenario under the sun. Like I mentioned, I happen to bring a lot of things just because that's kind of who I am and what I do. I just like to be able to figure something out. But you don't have to have everything. But having some stuff, if your job relies on, if you're an RF person, if you're hired as an RF coordinator, you should have an RF analyzer. That's just a tool for that particular job. If you're a lighting person, maybe you need a light meter, or you need some sort of a DMX terminator, or like something you should have in your back pocket for just in case. So there's all sorts of, there's also Angela Williams on Facebook says, bring the shop with an exclamation point. Yeah. I try not to, but that's kind of what happens. Especially if I'm on the road. And that's the other thing. When I'm on the road, I tend to take more stuff. I tend to take a lot of stuff. Even local, actually, it doesn't necessarily come into the venue. If I'm doing a local job, it might be in the trunk of my car. I maybe not wheel it in, but when I'm on the road, it kind of ends up in my tech kit. So with that, I think we're getting close to time. I was going to demo something, but I don't want to get into it. It would take too long and it's too niche. So I'm going to leave it there. I showed off some of the tools I use to troubleshoot. We had some great discussion. Excuse me. I definitely want to make sure before we go. again, thank you everybody who tuned in. We didn't have a ton of questions. I don't know that we actually had any actual questions. We had some comments, which were great. That was cool. But yeah, we didn't have a lot of questions. So I guess everybody is experts on troubleshooting, and we just wasted 2 hours. Who knows? But we want to thank you all for tuning in. Thank you guys for the comments. Thank you, Rick and Angelo. I see a bunch of comments from AV Trainer also here on Facebook. Thank you. Great, good conversation happening. And I also want to take a moment just real quick to thank DVE Store, because if you're watching us, you may notice that we're in high resolution. We're in high def. We're in 1080p. That's because of the support of DVE Store. They have graced us with this 1080p that we have here in Zoom. We have it. We're pushing it to Facebook. We push it to YouTube. So that's because of the support of DVE Store. Go check them out at dvestore.com. Guy and his team are amazing. They can help you with any of your gear needs. And they typically have stuff in stock sometimes that other places don't. They tend to get stock very early. So check them out at dvestore.com and let them know you heard about it from AV Tech Talks. And with that, I want to thank our panelists. Leland had to leave early, but thank you, Leland. Thank you, Iris, Pete, and Brian for being here. And as always, thank you, Omar. I know you were on the road when we first started and jumped in once you got to your destination. And Bodie, thank you. It's been a while, so I'm glad you were able to make it tonight. We'll be back in 2 weeks. If you remember, we're here every other Sunday at 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S. And hey, if you want to be on our panel, register for the Zoom webinar. Join us. We'd love to hear your opinions. This is a totally comfortable space. We're sharing with the community. We want you to be a part of the conversation. So please join in whenever you feel. I want to make sure that our Zoom audience sees that too. So yeah, thanks again to our panel. If you want to join us, come on over. We open the Zoom room a half hour early, and that's where sometimes we have some pretty interesting discussions before the show, and then sometimes we hang out after the show. So the Zoom is kind of the place to be. To hang out. But if you want to stay on Facebook or YouTube, that's okay too. Just make sure you throw some comments in. Let us know what you're thinking. And let us know how we're doing. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time.